I've always noticed in life that when things start to speed up to the point where you can't really control your speed anymore, where it's just when the brakes are gone and you're going down the mountain and you're navigating every single turn just fine. Oh, we're going great. And you look at the speedometer and you're going 100 miles an hour. There's always a 90-degree turn at the bottom of that hill. And you never make it. You crash. It's it's inevitable. You just can't keep up that kind of speed and that kind of pressure, on things for that long without finally hitting a brick wall. And 2008 was where they decided to build mine. So there was so much going on in the middle there between, when Andre came on board, my output just was absolutely breakneck. First it was the Looking Back Volume 1 and Volume 2, and then it was Take 5, the banjo collection, which he helped me work on, and then The Messenger, which he helped me work on. And then in the same year, also put out my Christmas album. I made it in the summer of 2008, and it came out that Christmas. And we were winning awards, and we were doing everything that we were doing was successful, but it was always the same problem. My marriage was poisoning everything. And you could ignore it for a while, and you could get around it, and you could make, concessions and exceptions and all these other things for, how it all appeared to the public. But there was just an underlying rot underneath everything that was happening, and there was just no way around it. And more people were getting affected by it, and just falling out of my life because they couldn't hack it at all. It was impossible. And the bass player's position in the band was the worst place to be because you were stuck. You were stuck in this eternal war between Hilda and I. And it wasn't tenable for anybody to work that position, because it eventually there would be some huge blow up, and a gig would almost be lost, and it just became impossible to justify staying with us for people, right? And there was one last person that, and Andre was, in with us and trying his best, and it wasn't easy for him. I can tell you that. He did his best to, just to keep the fucking wheels on the road, and it wasn't easy. So I had spent, most of my life around certain groups of people here in the Maritimes, and especially around the crew in Moncton, New Brunswick, where all the bluegrassers were. So you had the Mayes, and Danny, Norm, Fern, and the Eddie Poirier, and Eddie Arsenault, and Emile Robichaud, and the Bluegrass Diamonds, and it was a huge community up there. And I always spent time there. I spent in those years, in a couple of years, that when that output was so high, me and Russell Salter were inseparable. My banjo playing buddy from up in Moncton. We co-wrote most of the Messenger album together, and he had transcribed my guitar album, Primary Color, into a book, which didn't sell worth a shit. It was so disappointing because we worked so hard on that thing, and I printed 700 copies, and I think I still have two of them left. All these years later, they just didn't sell, and I was always there. I mean, me and Russell spent hours together on the phone and hours together in his house, and his wife was, real close to me. They were my family, and always considered them such. And so one day I was up at his place by myself, I guess. I used to go up there quite a bit alone to just work on things with Russell and laugh, and mostly sometimes just to get the hell out of my house, where I could feel, a little bit autonomous and just not under so much pressure from her. And so we're sitting at the kitchen table one night, and the conversation came around to we had no bass player. And at the time, Russell was doing pretty good with this. He had a business where he was basically the record vendor at all the bluegrass festivals. He had bought it from another guy, so it was an established business, and he was a traveling record store. Went around to all the festivals and did quite well with it. And in the wintertime, he had a transcription business for people, so because he was such an amazing banjo player, he could transcribe into tablature any banjo break ever taken. And he worked with Scott Vestal, and he worked with all these American banjo players to tab, their music. So the man had a good little thing going, So we're sitting at his kitchen table this one night, and he looks at me and goes, you're missing out. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you need a bass player. I said, well, yeah, I like to have a bass player. I need a guy who plays bass and guitar, who knows the fiddle tunes, and it'd be nice if he could sing harmony. And Russell starts pointing at himself. And I looked at him, I said, you'd play bass for me? He's like, why not? He said, and I immediately told him, I said, this gig doesn't pay a ton of money, I can afford to give you $150 or something, a show, and we work a lot, so you can make a fair bit of money, but you may never replace. And he's like, no. He said, listen, I'm an instant bass player. You just tell me where to go and I'll show up. And I was like, well, and he then looked at me and said, and Karen would come with me. And I was like, my brain screamed at me, my brain was like, that doesn't work. That's not a good plan. Now I got to explain something here. And this is an anomaly I've noticed up there in that area. All the bluegrass guys up there, of course, met their wives for the most part at festivals, right? And uh, they successfully seem to navigate always bringing their wives to gigs. But the point is that none of them actually tour really. Like out of the Maritimes or very far out of the Maritimes, they all have most of them had day jobs, and so it was a family affair to go play. And they were just used to it. And Russell and Karen were inseparable since they were teenagers, and that was great. They had a great marriage, still have a great marriage. But I knew from my own experience out in the wide world, where these guys really hadn't been, that you can't carry your wife on the road with you, especially if she doesn't have any musical contribution. It's just a bad idea. And it made the idea was even worse because I was traveling with my wife, and I could just see it because Karen was a stand-up girl and didn't take no shit off of nobody and loved Russell. And I just thought, oh boy, there's not going to be any problem between me and Russell. It's going to be between Karen and Hilda. It's going to be just a constant dick measuring exercise because Hilda's going to be cocking off and doing whatever, and Karen's not going to take it. And this is going to disintegrate. This is all going through my head as he's saying this. I'm thinking, oh, Jesus. Like in a world where I'm by myself, it's a beautiful idea. If it was just me and him and Karen, and then it starts to get worse. Russell's like, well, you don't even have to worry about us. We'll just get in our own vehicle and go. And I'm thinking, holy shit, man, you realize how many miles a year I drive, and he's driving a pretty old Chevy truck. Of course, he's a good mechanic. He keeps his vehicles perfect, but I'm just thinking to myself, holy shit, I don't know how this is gonna work. But by the end of the conversation, because I loved Russell so much and wanted to be around him all the time, I ended up saying yes to all this. Of course, without consulting Hilda, because I didn't really give a shit what Hilda or anybody else thought. It was my fucking band. I wanted to be able to choose my own personnel, and I knew that musically Russell could just kill it. And I thought, well, if he is going to just travel on his own, and Karen was more than willing to handle our merch and do road managing duties and all this other stuff, I thought, maybe this will work. Maybe this will work, And so it didn't work. There's something that people generally don't realize about music, and specifically bands of any kind. It's to be quite honest with you, a band of any sort, whether it's a backup band for a solo artist or a group that goes under a name, right? It's not about music. It really isn't about music. And it's shocking, but it's true. There's no. It's not about music or the player's ability. It's about personalities. And when personalities don't mesh, the band is doomed. And I can point out hundreds of groups that this happened to over the years: the Eagles, the Beatles, the Beach Boys. Like the personalities of the people involved, over time changed and whatnot, but it was all about personality. It didn't matter about, obviously their musical output was incredible, but they just couldn't get it together as people. And by the same token, I've seen, substandard musicians stay in bands for years because they're great people. They could have got a better player to fill that part, but they don't, because the guy's doing okay. He's holding it down, but they love the guy. They love the personality. The person is more valuable than someone else with a shitty disposition who has bigger chops, right? People don't get that. They don't understand the huge dynamic when you're working with somebody playing music. It's the feeling of camaraderie and closeness, and I've got your back, you've got mine. That thing literally creates good music. And if there's animosity anywhere around the crew, you can forget it. It's over. It isn't going to happen. So generally what happens is, if somebody in a band starts to bring their spouse or their significant other with them, just to have them there, right, with no function in the music part of the equation, which is why they're all there in the first place. It's bringing another personality into the situation that everyone has to deal with. And if there's already a problem with personalities in the group, then this complicates things even further. And that's why it doesn't work. It has nothing to do. This outsider that gets brought in could be the sweetest human being in the world, but you just can't. It seems impossible to find a group of people who, like everyone they meet. It just doesn't happen. So it's very complicated. And so, but I knew Russell and I knew Karen, and I loved both of them. And like I said, if it had been just me and them, it would have been fine as kind. But it just started out bad and went from that to worse, because Hilda didn't like Karen. And as far as I could tell, I could be wrong about that, but they weren't going to get along. And the way that Hilda handled things was just, she'd be kind of nice to your face, but as soon as your back was turned, she'd be just tearing you to ribbons. And this was a constant problem. And so one of the first things that we did was, they had booked, Brooks Diamond came in and booked me to play the Rebecca Cohen on my own. And the show sold out. We sold 900 tickets. It was the first time I'd ever played there by myself as the only draw. And it's the biggest fucking venue in the Maritimes. And it was a huge, huge deal to go there by yourself and sell it out. And it was sold out. And we had to rehearse this show. Well, rehearsal with Russell and Hilda in the same room was brutal, because Russell was Russell was a perfectionist, and he wanted to go over things, and he wanted to make sure he had things right, and he wanted to possibly improve things. And Hilda would make these comments like, Russell would make a mistake or stop and say, okay, what if we did this, or should I do that? And Hilda would make these snide comments like, well, I know all my parts, and I don't know what the hell's wrong with you guys. And it was, Russell was really a soft-hearted guy, and it hurt his feelings, and he just looked at me and like, what? Like, what's going on? And so it was just this passive-aggressive thing going on from Hilda to him, and him getting his feelings hurt every 5 minutes, and her sort of freezing Karen out, and me, I turned into a fucking referee between all of this immediately. And the pressure mounted and the pressure mounted, and suddenly I started having chest pains, bad ones. And I, it was like, it turned out to be, every time I swallowed, I would get this horrible pain in the center of my chest and like at the top of my stomach. And this was going on all day, and I finally said, boys, you guys have got to get your shit together. Like, you've got to stop fighting. Like, I can't take any more of this. Let's just get the goddamn rehearsal done, and let's not make any more comments. And I lost my shit a little bit, and then I said, now you've got to take me to the fucking hospital, because I'm in a lot of pain. I don't know what's wrong, and we got to go to the hospital. So off to the hospital we went. My doctor called in and said, what's going on? And I said, I don't know, but I'm in a lot of pain. It's every time I swallow, my spit hits a certain spot. He said, well, it's not a heart attack. He said, just go. I'm going to book you into this thing. So they took me into a room, and they did that thing where you make you drink a bunch of like Alka-Seltzer, and it blows your belly up inside, and they turn you on your head and take a picture of you. And what was going on was I had developed so much acid in my stomach, and I was on meds to keep that down, right? At this point, I was on acid meds and high blood pressure medication because I was in such bad shape from dealing with what I was having to deal with on a daily basis. I had so much acid that it inflamed one of the valve leaving my stomach. So every time I swallowed and that valve tried to contract, it was just excruciating. So the doctor said, just go and double your acid meds for a week, and it should take care of the problem. And it did. But on the way back from the hospital, it was just me and Russell. We were practicing in a hotel in Bedford. It was a couple days, just a day, I think, before the show was due to go. And it was just me and Russell, and we were going across the bridge, and I remember, and Russell just looked at me and said, man, you need to get out of this marriage. He just told me right up to my face. He said, this is the most poisoned situation I've ever seen in my life. And I said, well, yeah, I said, I tried to fucking tell you this. I tried to warn you about this, but now here you're in the middle of this now. And he was like, well, I'll stay in the middle of it because I love you. You're my friend. I said, but this situation is not tenable, and you're going to fucking die. If you don't get out of this, you're in a lot of trouble. And I said, well, it is what it is. There's a lot of money involved. There's property. There's all this investment done. This is not, doesn't just happen yesterday. At this point in time, we were married, nearly way over 10 years, I think, at that point. And, no, not way over, but we were married 10 or 12 years or something. And it was like, I just can't tear my entire life apart. I can't. So anyhow, things went on from there. There was a trip down to Virginia where they drove in a separate vehicle, and I tried everything, and I even did the Stompin' Tom route, and I got some walkie-talkies so that we could sort of talk to each other. They didn't have a cell phone, and I don't even know if we did. We might have had some kind of a phone. But anyhow, that trip was a disaster because the same thing. Like, Hilda couldn't get along with them, and it just made things worse and worse between me and Russell and Karen. And it was just a problem. Everything was a problem. It was going down the road, and Hilda just be listing off everything that was wrong with the situation. Well, they're taking their own car. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. Blah, 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 blah. 24 hours a day. And then came the trip to Scotland. And then it became real serious because then I had to pay I had to find a way to get Karen over there. I had to eat a plane ticket for her to go over there. And I don't even remember how we sorted it out, whether Russell helped me pay for it, or I don't remember how we got her ticket, but she got the ticket and we went over. And things just deteriorated to the point where I started snapping at Russell because I couldn't take any more. I just couldn't take any more of this. Every minute that we were together in the same room, it got to the point where we were going into we went over restaurants in there, and we weren't sitting at the same table. It was that bad. But when me and Russell were off by ourselves, we were okay. But when all four of us were within 6 feet of each other, you could just feel this horrible, evil, horrible thing going on. This energy that just sapped you. It just drew every bit of your heart out of you. And after a while, I started taking it out on Russell, and I was just like, this is not going to work. I just can't keep doing this. And at the time I thought, I'm going to lose Russell as a friend forever if I don't get him the fuck out of this band. I can't, I mean, there's no way we're going to end up hating each other. And, well, I would never have hated Russell because I love Russell, but I was becoming incredibly abrasive because I was under so much pressure. And the music was fantastic. The harmonies were awesome. Russell was a fucking amazing musician. Bass player, guitar player. And he was kind-hearted, and people liked him. He was a nice man, right? And then now here's something else that I forgot too, was that we went to do a television show in Halifax. And I'm not sure if this happened. I'm pretty sure this happened before Scotland, right? But this is how bad it was, right? And I hope I forgot about this, but I can't believe I did, but it just occurred to me. This is how bad it was. We went to do a thing called breakfast television on CTV television here in Halifax, and we had to get up rather early in the morning, and we were going to be playing. It was January, and we were doing an outside New Year's Eve gig, and so we're playing the thing, and Hilda was on stun, of course, and the pressure and the tension and all the shit that was going on. Russell came outside and said, "Jesus, I'm hurting right here." And I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I don't know. Won't go away." And so we played the show, live television, played the show, and then he walked outside and he looked really bad. And I said, "Well, you better go to the hospital." And normally he would never do nothing like that, but he looked at Karen and he said, "Yeah, you better take me over to the hospital." Well, he had a heart attack. He'd had the heart attack while playing with us on television. And I knew what caused it. And he said, he was like, "No, I think I was having problems the other day when I was trying to start my snowblower and all this stuff, but God damn it, I mean, there was so much ugly, ugly tension between the four of us that I knew what was going on. He just couldn't hack it anymore, and he had a fucking heart attack. So there he was in the hospital getting a stent put in, and of course he missed the gig, of course, and I replaced him with another. I think I had Allie Bennett come down and play for me. It was live television. I needed the bass player. And this happened before Scotland, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, because, Scotland was the last thing we did. And that was yet another factor of why I was trying to get him out of the band. I thought, this man's going to die. If I don't get him out of this, he's only doing this because he's loyal to me, and uh, yeah, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. It was the worst thing I ever did. It was the stupidest thing I ever did was hire him because he was my best friend and somebody who really, really meant a lot to me, and I threw him right into the meat grinder. I tried to warn him. But he wouldn't listen to me. He was determined to help me, and that's the way Russell is, and there you go. So, we're in Scotland. All of this stuff is playing on me. His health, the continuing deterioration of the relationship between all of us, and it's just, I can see things going south in a grand way. And so it ends with me in a phone booth with about 10 pounds of change on the street in Glasgow, trying to call Andre, and finally get a hold of Andre, and I say, listen, and I took the coward's way out, and I regret that too. I said to Andre, I said, you're going to have to let Russell go when we get home, because this isn't working, and I can't do this anymore. And Andre was like, well, Jesus, I mean, I'll do it for you. I said, it's my job to do it, but are you sure? And I was like, yeah, well, I mean, he's not well. The man just had a heart attack, and things are not getting any better. The interpersonal relationship between these four people is just continuing to just erode to the point where either he's going to have another heart attack or I'm going to have one or something. It was just not realistic to continue on. And so Andre said, okay, when you get home, I'll call him and we'll let him go. And that's what happened. And, it sucked badly. Andre called Russell and said, we're going to have to let you go. And Russell was like, what? And I don't know what excuse Andre made. He, is a good diplomat, Andre. He tried to make it as soft as he could. But Russell's answer was like, well, Jesus Christ, boys, I don't have a plan B. He had sold his business. He had sold the record business. And he's like, I don't have a plan B, guys. Like, what the fuck? And Andres just said, well, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is, And so Russell never spoke to me again. And I lost one of my best friends over this stupid choice I made. And thankfully, I was able to actually talk to Russell a couple of years ago at a festival up in New Brunswick, and he was more receptive to me. Russell's a kind-hearted man, and so I made contact with Karen, and so we have spoken to each other, but obviously it's a relationship that's irreparable. It affected his life in a larger scale than anyone else's who ever came to work for me. He sacrificed his business and stuff to come to work for me, and then this happened. So I deserve everything I got on that front with him, which was no more Russell Soller in my life, which broke my heart because he's one of the best friends I ever had. And I made a decision at that point. I started to fall apart after that, and in more ways than one. I subconsciously I think I was just I at that point I was ready to just shred everything I had and be done with it because it was a loss to me. I couldn't rationalize. Um, to go back a ways, you know, there was a point in time when I didn't speak to Dave Gunning for a whole year because you know Hilda egged me. Hilda didn't like Dave either, and she egged me into getting into a fight with him over royalties over something we wrote together. And her position was just that he was in the wrong, and she was pounding on me, and I took that stance as well, wrongly. And him and I ended up not speaking to each other for a year. Thank God we both came to our senses and went, let's just ignore her and be friends because we're more than friends. We're brothers, as the song says, right? And so Dave and I, to this day, are the closest. He's the closest friend I have in the world. But I mean, like I almost lost him too, and now I've lost Russell, and I'm about to lose Andre because I was just breaking down. I was having a nervous breakdown, and I don't even remember. I think I just blocked it out. How the end of myself and Andre Bourgeois even happened. I don't remember. I'm embarrassed to say that, but I'm sure it was over something stupid that was because Hilda was overreacting. I just lost my mind and fired him, thinking, well, I just can't succeed no matter what I do because of the situation I'm in. I might as well just blow this shit up. And that's how I lost Andre. And that wasn't good either. It was just at the end of things, it just became every single thing that I built, when I would build something that had potential musically, especially, it was just torn apart by my marriage and couldn't stop it from happening. It just continued to happen over and over and over again. And more people that knew me well, that knew me like family, were continuing to tell me, you've got to get out of this. There's no way around it. But I was stubborn. Part of me loved her too. She was, there's the band and the business and all these other things, but there were parts of Hilda that were fantastic. She could be a kind-hearted person and a compassionate person and all these other things, but I just saw less and less and less of that as years wore on. It was just like, this is not, and we tried everything. We went to counseling, but she wouldn't let anybody say anything in a counseling session. It was, and the counselors, the last one we went to just looked at her at one point and said, nobody said a word in here but you for the last half an hour. Do you think we could let JP, answer a question? And that was the end of the session. She was ready to walk out, and she virtually did. And we were completely incompatible, except for music. And even that was not that compatible because she just didn't have enough chops outside Cape Breton piano music to follow where I wanted to go musically. And she struggled with stuff outside that style, and it was evident. And, you follow your heart into something, and you marry, and you make promises in front of family and community and God, if you believe in it, and you don't want to let all of that down. And I'm a stubborn man. I keep my word. To my own detriment, I try to keep my word. One last thing happened. Before we lost Andre, I was in a pub one night in Halifax. We had no bass player again. I don't know how many we had. I've forgotten some of them. I haven't mentioned some of them, but there was about 16 or 17 of them over 14 years. And so we were without a bass player. I got invited by my good friend Doug Sampson. He told me about this young kid that was playing with him in their band. His name was Darren McMullen. So I went down to the pub one night to see these guys play, and I watched this kid. He had his own little four channel mixer, and he played bass, banjo, bouzouki, guitar. This guy was friggin' brilliant. What a musician he was. And even Doug looked at me and said, "This guy doesn't belong in bars." And I agreed. And I went to him during that show and said, "I'd like you to come to work for me." And long story short, he did. And he was one of the only people that got along with Hilda okay, even though there was still plenty of drama going on. But Darren's sense of humor was so good that he was just able to sort of laugh it off. And we played some fantastic music together. He ended up playing bass on the Messenger album and whistle and bouzouki, and we cut an album on him. I did an album for him for free because I just thought he was so brilliant that he needed to have his own product. And he stayed with us for several years, a couple of years, I think. I don't remember exactly how, but we're getting down to sort of, critical mass in this story where just a whole bunch of things went down at once, and everything changed. And I think I'll leave it there because It was just at the very end of Andre, and Darren was new in the band. We put out the Messenger, which was very well received. I think I won some awards for that, and it was at the high. It was my highest output, I feel, as a singer songwriter, was that album. And of course, Andre had a lot to do with he co-produced the record, sang on it, helped do all these things. Darren played on it. Kieran O'Hare played on it. It was a fantastic record, and I thought at the time, this could be the deal right here, that I could carry this unit into, because another thing about Darren, he was so good that he pushed Hilda, and Hilda started to come on, because he was Darren was just a phenomenon, and Andre knew it too, and Andre would come to rehearsals and help us make arrangements, and put the pressure on Hilda to do different things and harder things, and we were just able to get a lot of work done very quickly. And the live band, the trio live, started to really kick ass, and but it wasn't meant to be, because Darren was so good that and I believed in that. I always did this. I always wanted to do this. A lot of the people that passed through my group went on to do fantastic things, and I was totally good with that. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep Darren. Darren was just too goddamn good. And of course, we'll get into that in the next episode, but he did end up going out after me and played with the Rankins, played with David Francie, played with you name it. And now he's the front man of one of the biggest Celtic supergroups in the world, which is exactly where he belongs. He deserves that. And but at that time, there was a magic happening that, you know, really had some potential. And I'll just leave it there for now. And we're going to have to get into the we're soon coming to the end of an era when it comes to my career. That 14 years spent with Hilda and spent with all the different people in the industry that I worked with when I was trying to play that game, which was a waste of time because playing the game never really works. And if I'd have known that, I wish I'd have known it a lot earlier than I did. I suspected it for all my career, but as I said earlier, I always thought there was a possibility that I might be able to win some limited victory by playing the game. And I did, because I came out of the game with a career that has longevity, and I have freedom to do what I want to in my career. And if I had won a bigger victory in the industry, I may not have ended up in that position now. So yeah, it was an interesting time, I'll tell you that, but it was the guards were about to change, I'll tell you, in a big way.